My grandfather used to say that money remembers who earned it. I didn't understand what he meant until I was 26 years old, standing in my parents' kitchen in Lakewood, Colorado, watching my father slide a cashier's check across the counter to my older brother like it was a birthday card. $285,000, Dad said, not looking at me. Your grandfather left it to both of you. But Derek has a real plan for it. A company. This is bigger than either of us. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding along like she'd rehearsed it. You've always been the independent one, Maya. You'll land on your feet. You always do. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with my parents about Derek was like arguing with weather. I nodded once, picked up my coat, and walked out to my car in the November cold, and I didn't come back for a long time. That was the day everything in my family quietly split in two. The wait before the split. To understand why that check didn't come with my name on it too, you have to understand what our family had already decided about the two of us, years before either of us had done anything to earn it. Derek was born 18 months before me, and from what I've been told, my father spent the first 3 years of Derek's life terrified of him, not because Derek was difficult, but because my father had grown up under a man who never once told him he was proud of him. My grandfather, the same man who eventually left us that inheritance, ran his hardware store in Pueblo with a discipline that left no room for softness. My father used to say that the only time his own father hugged him was at the man's own retirement dinner, and even then it felt obligatory, like a handshake dressed up as affection. So when Derek was born, my father made a private vow, one he told me about only once, years later, half drunk at a cousin's wedding. He was never going to let his son grow up wondering if he was enough. He was going to tell him he was brilliant, capable of anything, destined for something big, and he told him that so many times, so consistently, that by the time Derek was in 3rd grade, he genuinely believed the world owed him a spectacular life. My mother came from a different kind of scarcity. She'd grown up the youngest of 5 in a cramped apartment in Pueblo West, and the one thing she'd always said she envied about wealthier families was the way they seemed to talk about their children's futures like those futures were already guaranteed. With Derek, she finally got to talk like that. My son is going to do something extraordinary, she'd tell anyone who'd listen. At church, at the nail salon, at parent-teacher conferences, she never had to attend for me because I never gave anyone a reason to be called in. I came along 18 months later and apparently solved myself. I did well in school without being pushed. I didn't cry when things went wrong. I fixed my own bike when the chain slipped, I balanced my own checkbook at 16, and somewhere in there my parents developed a kind of shorthand about me. Maya's fine. Maya doesn't need much. Save the worrying, the meetings with teachers, the money, the emotional real estate, for Derek, who apparently needed all of it. It wasn't cruelty, not at first. It was triage. But triage, done for 20 years without ever being revisited, becomes a personality. By the time I was in college on a partial scholarship, working nights at a call center to cover the rest, Derek was on his 3rd parent-funded opportunity, a music label that never signed an artist, a food truck that never left the driveway, a phone app that never launched. Each time, my parents explained it away. He's finding himself. He thinks bigger than the rest of us. You wouldn't understand, Maya. You've never had that kind of ambition. I did have ambition. I just didn't have anyone financing mine. I remember one Thanksgiving during my sophomore year of college, sitting at the table while my father explained, in detail, how Derek's failed food truck had actually been a valuable lesson in market timing, and nobody at that table asked me a single question about the internship I'd just landed at a downtown accounting firm. The one I'd competed against 40 other applicants for. I didn't bring it up either. I'd learned that bringing up my own life uninvited felt, in that house, like an accusation. By the time I graduated, I had learned the one lesson that would define the next decade of my life. If I wanted something, I would build it myself, quietly, without asking anyone for permission or money, because both would be handed to Derek before they ever reached me. What I built while no one was watching. I took an entry-level analyst job at a small risk consulting firm in Denver the year after college, the kind of place that reviewed struggling companies for banks trying to decide whether to keep lending them money. It was unglamorous work, reading balance sheets, flagging companies that were burning cash faster than they admitted, writing reports nobody outside a boardroom would ever read. But I was good at it. I had a talent for spotting the gap between what a company said about itself and what its numbers actually showed, a talent I'd probably built without realizing it, 20 years of learning to read the gap between what my family said about Derek and what was actually true. I didn't tell my family much about my work, partly because they never asked with any real curiosity. Still doing your numbers thing was about the extent of it, and partly, if I'm honest, because I'd started to enjoy having something that was entirely mine. Something Derek couldn't be given a slice of at Thanksgiving. 3 years in, I left the firm with 2 colleagues, a sharp, blunt-spoken woman named Priya Nair, who became my closest friend and eventually my business partner, and an older analyst named Walt Ferris who believed in me before I believed in myself and became something like the mentor I never had at home. Priya and I had bonded over a shared habit of staying late to double-check numbers nobody else thought needed checking, and by the time we quit together to start our own thing, she knew more about my family than most of my actual family did. She was the one who sat with me on my apartment floor the night I finally admitted, out loud, how much it had cost me to watch that check change hands. She didn't tell me to get over it. She just said, "Then let's build something they can't touch," and somehow that was exactly the right thing to say. Together, the 3 of us started Meridian Analytics, a boutique firm doing due diligence and turnaround assessments for investors trying to figure out whether a struggling company was worth saving or worth walking away from. The first 2 years were brutal. I worked out of a shared office space above a dry cleaner, ate more instant ramen than I care to admit, and slept an average of 5 hours a night. My then boyfriend, now husband, David, watched me turn down vacations, birthdays, and eventually the idea of trying for kids anytime soon because every spare dollar and every spare hour went back into the firm. He never once told me to stop. He just kept showing up with coffee at midnight and reminding me, on the nights I doubted myself, that I'd built something out of nothing while everyone who was supposed to help me had looked the other way. David worked as a high school physics teacher, a job that paid steadily but modestly, and there were months where a salary alone kept us afloat while every cent I made went straight back into payroll. He never once brought that up as leverage. It became, quietly, one of the things I loved most about him, that he never once made me feel like I owed him for believing in me. By year 4, Meridian had a reputation. We weren't flashy. We didn't chase headlines. But when private equity firms needed someone to tell them the truth about a company's books before they wrote a check, they called us, because we didn't flatter anyone's story. We turned away twice as many clients as we accepted, because Walt had built the firm's reputation on saying no to companies whose numbers didn't hold up, even when saying no meant losing the engagement fee. "We sell the truth," he used to say. "The day we start selling comfort instead, we're just another PR firm with a spreadsheet." I took that to heart more than he probably realized. Outside of work, I'd found a strange kind of peace in rock climbing, something David had introduced me to during our second year together. There was something about a wall that didn't care who your parents favored, that only responded to whether you'd trained your grip and studied the route, that felt like the opposite of my entire childhood. I climbed most Saturday mornings with a small group from a gym near our apartment, and it was the one place in my week where nobody knew anything about Meridian or Derek or the inheritance or any of it. I was just Maya, working out a problem 18 feet off the ground. I never told my parents how well the firm was doing. Not because I was hiding a grand reveal, I wasn't plotting anything, not then, but because every time I tried to talk about work at a family dinner, the conversation drifted back to Derek within 2 sentences. Derek's new office. Derek's new investors. Derek's vision. I stopped trying to compete for airtime I was never going to get, and I let my life exist quietly, off to the side, the way it always had. There was one exception, a single afternoon I still think about more than almost any other memory from that decade. Meridian had just closed its first 7-figure engagement, a distressed regional grocery chain that Walt had personally walked through bankruptcy restructuring, and I drove out to my parents' house that same evening, still half giddy, wanting, for once, to tell them something good about my own life before it curdled into background noise. My father was in the garage, and I told him, plainly, what had happened, how much the engagement was worth, how proud Walt had been of the work. He listened, nodded, said, "That's good, sweetheart," and then, almost in the same breath, asked whether I'd heard from Derek about his upcoming board meeting because he was worried the new chief vision officer wasn't a good influence. I stood in that garage for a moment, feeling something in my chest quietly close itself back up, and I said I hadn't heard anything, and I never brought Meridian up at that house again. Priya noticed the difference in me for weeks afterward, though I never fully explained why. I didn't need to explain it to David, though. He'd been in the car when I called him from the driveway, and he never once suggested I try again. The startup that ate everything. Derek's new venture, the one that finally got our grandfather's money, was called Ascend Wellness Tech, a fitness app meets hardware company built around a subscription device that tracked recovery metrics for amateur athletes. It wasn't a bad idea. Plenty of companies in that space had done well. But Derek had never run a company with real capital before, and real capital, in his hands, behaved the way gasoline behaves near an open flame. He hired too fast. He rented an office in downtown Denver with exposed brick and a rooftop deck before he had 10 paying customers. He brought on a chief vision officer, a college friend with no operating experience, at a 6-figure salary. Our parents, thrilled to finally have something tangible to brag about, told anyone who would listen that their son was the next big thing in wellness tech, and every time Derek needed another round of funding to cover the burn rate, my father found a way to help, a second mortgage here, a retirement account loan there. My mother started attending investor mixers with Derek, introducing herself as the founder's mother with a pride that, I'll admit, stung more than I expected it to, even years after I thought I'd made peace with all of it. I heard about all of this secondhand, at holidays, in updates that grew more triumphant and less specific with each passing year. Series A, Strategic Partnerships. A pilot program with a hospital network that never quite materialized into a contract. I said nothing. I'd learned that questioning Derek's story, even gently, got treated as jealousy, so I simply stopped asking. One Christmas, when Derek mentioned an upcoming valuation north of $40 million, I asked, mildly, what the company's actual revenue looked like. The table went quiet in a way I recognized immediately, and my mother changed the subject before Derek could answer. I never asked again. What I didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, because none of them had ever thought to ask someone who actually understood balance sheets, was that by year 4, Ascend was burning through nearly $400,000 a month against barely $60,000 in revenue. The device had a defect rate that was quietly being handled through non-disclosure agreements. 2 of the 3 original investors had already tried, unsuccessfully, to force Derek out as CEO. I found out how bad it was the way I found out about most things involving my family, by accident through my job from someone who had no idea there was any connection between us at all. The call. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when Priya forwarded me an email with the subject line, Distressed Asset Review, Ascend Wellness Tech, Confidential. A mid-sized private equity fund called Brightline Capital was one of Ascend's original investors, and they'd hired Meridian to conduct an independent valuation and turnaround assessment before deciding whether to write off their position entirely or attempt a structured acquisition of the company's assets at a steep discount. The company name meant nothing unusual to Priya. Companies came across our desk by the dozen. It was only when I opened the data room and saw the founder's name in the cap table, Derek R. Chun, that I sat completely still at my desk for almost a full minute. I didn't say anything to Priya that day. I told myself it was a coincidence worth double-checking, that there had to be other Derek Chens running wellness startups in Colorado. There weren't. The address on the incorporation documents was the same downtown office with the rooftop deck. The photo in the pitch deck, 3 years out of date, was unmistakably my brother, grinning in a company polo in front of a banner that read Ascend, Beyond Your Limits. I sat with that data room open for 2 hours before I called Walton to my office and told him the truth. Not the numbers, but the family history behind them. He listened without interrupting, the way he always did, and when I finished he said something I've never forgotten. You don't have to take this engagement, Maya. Nobody would blame you. But you're the best person in this firm to tell Brightline the truth, and if you walk away, someone with less context does it instead, and does it worse for everyone, including your brother. I went home that night and told David everything, sitting on the kitchen floor with a bottle of wine we never got around to opening. He didn't tell me what to do. He just asked one question. If Derek were a stranger, would you take this case? I told him yes, without hesitation. Then the only thing that's changed, he said, is that you're being asked to be braver than usual. Not different. Just braver. I thought about my grandmother sometimes, the one who used to slip me $20 bills at Christmas for your own account, not the family one. Like she somehow knew, even then, that I would need to build something quietly and alone. She'd passed 3 years earlier, before any of this, before Meridian's growth, before the acquisition, before any version of vindication I might have wanted to show her. I thought about the check my father had slid across the counter without looking at me, and I took the engagement. Preparation. The diligence process took 6 weeks, and I ran it the way I ran every review. Thoroughly, dispassionately, and without a single line in my report that hinted I had any relationship to the founder. I recused myself from any direct communication with Ascend's leadership team during the fact-finding phase, routing every request through Priya instead, both to protect the integrity of the review and, if I'm honest, to protect myself from having to hear Derek's voice before I was ready. Priya and Walt reviewed every page of my findings before they went out. We built the report the way we built every report, line by line, footnote by footnote, nothing asserted that wasn't backed by a document. I read Ascend's board minutes going back 3 years. I read the emails from the outgoing CFO, a woman named Renata Ibarra, who had flagged the unsustainable burn rate in writing on 4 separate occasions before resigning 8 months earlier, exhausted from being overruled every time. I read the customer complaint logs about the recovery sensor's failure rate, quietly settled through arbitration clauses buried in the terms of service. None of it surprised me the way it might have surprised someone who didn't already understand exactly how persuasive my brother could be, and exactly how little resistance he'd ever had to learn to expect. The night before the acquisition committee meeting, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake running the numbers over and over, not because I doubted them, but because some old, stubborn part of me kept waiting for a version of the story where I was wrong, where Derek's company was actually fine and I'd simply misread something. There wasn't one. I got up at 4 a.m. and sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, and David found me there an hour later and sat with me without saying anything, which was exactly what I needed. Confrontation scene. The acquisition committee meeting was held in Brightline's downtown offices, 17 floors above the street, in a glass conference room with a view of the mountains. I presented my findings to 6 people around a long table, Brightline's managing partners, their general counsel, and 2 board observers. I had done this exact kind of presentation dozens of times. I did not expect, when the door opened 20 minutes in for a scheduled walkthrough of the term sheet, that Derek himself would be sitting on the other side of the video call screen they wheeled in, invited, as founder, to hear the committee's decision in real time. For a moment neither of us said anything. His face on the screen went from the practiced, confident smile he'd clearly prepared for this meeting to something closer to disbelief, then something closer to panic. Maya? His voice cracked slightly over the speaker. What? You're the one who did this report. The managing partner beside me, a woman named Elaine Whitfield, glanced between the screen and me with polite confusion. You 2 know each other? She's my sister, Derek said, before I could decide how to answer. I kept my voice level, the way I had trained myself to for 6 years of client meetings. I'm the lead analyst on this engagement. My findings are in the report you've already received. I stand behind every line of it. You're trying to take my company, Derek said, and I watched something in him, the same wounded, disbelieving look he used to get as a kid when a game didn't go his way, rise to the surface in front of 5 strangers and a conference table. This is, Maya, this is family. You can't do this. I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm telling the people who put in the capital what the capital actually shows. That's my job, Derek. It's been my job for 6 years. You've just never asked what it was. Dad gave me that inheritance to build something, he said, and his voice had gone thin now, almost pleading. Not so you could show up 5 years later and dismantle it. Dad gave you $285,000 that was half mine, I said, and I felt the room go very quiet. I didn't ask for a cent of it back. I built my own company with nothing because nothing was what I was offered. What I'm not going to do is lie to a room full of investors so that you can keep burning through their money the way you burned through his. Elaine cleared her throat gently. Miss Chun, would you like us to reconvene without your involvement, given that? No, I said, before Derek could answer for me. My analysis is sound whether I'm in the room or not. But since we're all here, Derek, the defect rate on the recovery sensor was disclosed to exactly one of your 3 funding rounds. Your CFO flagged the burn rate in writing 4 times in the last 18 months. I have the emails. Everyone in this meeting has the emails. This isn't a story about a jealous sister. It's a story about a company that ran out of money because the person running it never let anyone tell him the truth. That's not fair, Derek said, quieter now. You don't know what it's been like. Every investor call, every board meeting, everyone waiting for me to fail. I know what it's like to build something with no safety net, if that's what you're asking, I said. The difference is that when I made mistakes, there wasn't $285,000 sitting behind me to absorb them. You had a cushion I never had, Derek. And you still ran out of runway. That's not something I did to you. That's what happens when the numbers stop lying for you. Derek didn't answer right away. On the screen, I watched his shoulders drop, watched the practiced founder's posture collapse into something smaller, something closer to the version of him I remembered from childhood, right before a tantrum, except this time there was no parent in the room to soften the landing for him. You could have called me, he finally said quietly. Before all this, you could have warned me. I'm telling you now, I said. The same way nobody ever warned me about anything my whole life. I'm sorry it has to happen like this. I'm not sorry I told the truth. There was a long pause. One of the board observers, a younger man I didn't recognize, finally spoke up, addressing Derek directly, not unkindly. For what it's worth, Mr. Chin, the report is one of the more thorough diligence packages I've seen this year. Whatever the personal history here, the numbers aren't in dispute. The committee voted to proceed with the structured acquisition an hour later. Derek's equity, along with that of the other 2 early investors, was effectively zeroed out. Brightline retained the technology, the patents, and 11 of the company's 40 employees. Derek was offered a small consulting retainer to assist with the transition, which he declined. Immediate consequences. The fallout moved fast, the way it always does once the money stops. Within a week, my father called me, and it was not the conversation I expected. He didn't yell. He sounded, for the first time in my adult life, genuinely lost. Your mother thinks you did this on purpose, he said. To get back at him. At us. I did my job, I told him. The company was going to fail with or without my report. I just happened to be the one holding the numbers when it did. You could have refused the engagement. I could have, I said. So could you have 20 years ago, when you decided which of your kids needed help and which one didn't. He didn't have an answer for that. The silence on the line lasted long enough that I eventually said goodbye and hung up. He called again 2 days later, and this time he didn't bring up the report at all. He asked, instead, whether I remembered a fishing trip we'd taken when I was 9, just the 2 of us, before Derek's ventures had started to consume every family conversation. I did remember it. I didn't know what to do with the fact that he brought it up, except to understand, dimly, that some part of him was reaching for a version of us that existed before all of this, a version I wasn't sure had ever really been as solid as he wanted it to be. Derek didn't speak to me for 4 months. When he finally did, it was a short, formal text asking whether Meridian did resume consulting for founders transitioning out of failed startups, an ordinary business question, addressed to me like I was any other consultant, which was, in its own bruised way, the first honest interaction we'd had in years. I connected him with a career coach we'd used with other founders. I didn't offer to do the work myself. Some boundaries, once drawn, deserve to stay drawn. My mother, for her part, sent one message. I hope you're happy. I didn't answer it for 3 days, and when I finally did, all I wrote back was, I'm not happy. I'm relieved that I finally don't have to pretend the math worked out differently than it did. She didn't reply to that at all, and for a while I wondered if I'd lost her entirely. It was Priya, in the end, who told me something I needed to hear. You didn't take anything from her that she wasn't already going to lose the moment the numbers came due. You just happened to be standing there when they did. Renata Ibarra, The former CFO who'd tried and failed to get Derek to listen reached out to me a few weeks after the acquisition closed, having heard through mutual industry contacts that Meridian had run the review. I half expected her to be angry that I hadn't credited her warnings more visibly in the report. Some people in her position would have wanted the vindication spelled out, but instead she just wanted to talk, over coffee, about what it had been like to watch a company burn from the inside while its founder refused every off-ramp she offered him. I used to think if I found the right chart, the right way to say it, he'd finally hear me, she told me. It took me 2 years to understand that the problem was never the chart. I didn't tell her Derek was my brother until near the end of that conversation, and when I did, she just nodded slowly, like several things about the last 18 months had suddenly rearranged themselves into a clearer picture. That explains why your report didn't sound angry, she said. It sounded tired, like someone who'd been trying to get through to him a lot longer than 18 months. I didn't correct her. Resolution/epilogue. It's been 8 months since the acquisition closed. Meridian has grown to 18 employees, and Brightline has become one of our largest recurring clients, which is its own strange irony I try not to think about too hard. Derek is working as an operations manager at a mid-sized logistics company in Fort Collins, steady, unglamorous, the kind of job that would have horrified the version of him who once stood on a rooftop deck telling investors he was building the next big thing in wellness. I hear he's good at it. I hear from Priya, who still has friends in Denver's startup circles, that he's stopped telling people he used to run his own company. My father and I speak occasionally now, careful, surface-level calls that never touch the inheritance directly. He has never apologized outright. I don't think he has the language for it, the same way his own father never had the language to tell him he was proud. But last month he asked, almost shyly, if he could see the new office. I said yes. He stood in the lobby of Meridian for a long time, looking at the framed clippings from 2 industry publications that had profiled the firm, and he didn't say much. He just nodded, the same quiet nod my mother gave me the day she handed my inheritance to someone else, except this time I understood it meant something different. Not pride, exactly. Recognition, maybe, arriving 5 years too late to change anything that mattered. He asked before he left if I still climbed. I told him I did, most Saturdays. He said he'd always meant to try it, back when Derek was young and there'd been a gym near the old house, but there never seemed to be time. I told him it wasn't too late. He laughed, a small, uncertain laugh, and said maybe. I don't know if he ever will. I've stopped expecting the conversations that would make everything make sense, and I've started, slowly, accepting the smaller ones instead. A fishing trip remembered. A lobby stood in quietly, a maybe that might never become a yes. My mother and I are not close, not the way we once pretended to be at holiday tables. She calls on my birthday. We talk about the weather, about David, about nothing that matters, and I've decided that's allowed to be enough for now, even if it isn't everything I once wanted from her. I think about my grandmother sometimes, the $20 bills she used to slip me at Christmas, the account she seemed to know I'd need before I knew it myself. She didn't live to see any of this, not Meridian, not the acquisition, not the quiet, complicated peace I've made with what my family did and didn't give me. I used to think that if I ever succeeded, on my own terms, loudly enough, it would feel like justice. It doesn't, not really. It feels more like arriving somewhere important alone, long after the people who should have walked there with you decided you didn't need the company. David and I are trying for a baby now, finally, on our own timeline instead of the one dictated by a business that once needed every hour I had. Some nights I lie awake doing the math on what those years cost me, the vacations, the sleep, the version of my 20s I don't get back, set against what they built. I don't know if the ledger ever balances. I've spent my whole career telling other people the truth about what their numbers show. I'm still working out what mine actually say. Last weekend at the climbing gym, a woman in my group asked why I always seemed so calm on the hardest routes, the ones where most people's grip started shaking halfway up the wall. I told her the truth. I'd had a lot of practice holding steady, while everyone around me assumed I didn't need help getting to the top. She laughed, thinking it was a joke about climbing. I let her think that. Some things I've learned are true on more than one level at once, and not every truth needs to be explained to be carried.